Call the Patterson Park Planning Commission meeting to order. Today is February 10th, 2022. I will start with calling the roll. So commissioners, please just indicate if you are present. Commissioner Chesterton.
Present.
Commissioner Coletta.
Present.
Commissioner Evans.
Present.
I am Commissioner Lindsay, present. Commissioner Santerre.
Present.
Commissioner Bataki.
Present.
Mayor Hodges.
Present.
City Manager Seisland.
Present.
And City Attorney Shell.
Present.
All are present. Fantastic. Let's move right into the approval of the December 16th meeting minutes. Everyone has the opportunity to take a look at the meeting minutes.
I move approval.
Okay, Mayor Hodges, I have a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second? Commissioner Bataki, we have a second. We will do unanimous consent. All in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the meeting minutes are approved. Excellent. Okay, we will move on to public comment on agenda items. Do we have any?
Yes,
email?
I do have one written public comment
Okay.
for the agenda items.
We'll
This-
start with the written public comment, and then we'll move on to any public comments in person.
Yes, so this public comment comes from Mr. Greg Donnelly in Grosse Pointe Park. I want to comment today on the city's new master plan, which it seems will be recommended for a public hearing and adoption by city council. First, I think that we should all be proud of the efforts that led to having such a plan. It's a huge improvement over the previous plan, to be sure. The vision includes worthwhile concepts for a walkable, bike-friendly, sustainable, historic, diverse, and safe community, and proclaims that collaboration and transparency are highly valued and are paramount. But how are these concepts actually included in the plan in a meaningful way? And how will they be implemented successfully? Today, we're still tearing down perfectly good housing, the kind of housing that invites a more diverse population for surface parking lots in the middle of residential blocks. And we build it without any clear sustainable practices or feedback from the neighbors. The plan doesn't do much to capitalize on the significant opportunity to collaborate across the border we share with Detroit. Particularly, why do the 10 physical barriers of this border not all addressed by the master plan? The proposed Scott Center for Performing Arts does not meet the current or future requirements for Jefferson Avenue at the Detroit border. The project also, and this is significant, requires the permanent closure of a street that is not all addressed in the plan. This is a good start, but we can and should do better. That's my written public comment.
Okay, thank you, City Manager. Is there anyone present tonight who would like to make a public comment? Okay, you would like to stand and state your name and your
Sure.
city of residence?
Mary Rulo, Grosse Pointe Park. It's more like a series of bullet points for this speech. A lot of good things in the plan, and I say a big yes to a 5-year capital improvement plan, to enhancing bus stops, to marking pedestrian crossings along Charlevoix, updating the zoning ordinance to better provide for sustainability, just changing the charter to make development review and approval processes methodical and transparent. I like the vision statement, but I think it should explicitly include the words community engagement in there. I also like the part about encouraging a more diversified housing stock, the idea of conducting a housing market study to determine demand for mixed-use multifamily, and to determine incentives that will construct housing that will serve our large aging population of people with disabilities. Yes to supporting diverse and inclusive businesses. I'd like to thank the Commission for hiring MKSK and for incorporating a high level of community engagement in the process. Master plan will be an expression of the will of the community. So decisions of the TIPA, the DDA, this commission and the council should be measured against it. So where action would contradict the plan, or where the plan is silent in the future, there really should be a public input process before taking any actions that would be contrary to the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present? Sir, if you'd like to stand and state your name and your city of residence, please.
Schroeder, Grosse Pointe Park. Considering Mr. Donnelly's comments, his comments were very front and center in the last election, and I think that the majority of people that chose to vote disagreed with a lot of what Mr. Donnelly has to say and think. I don't know of any parking lots that were put in the middle of any residential blocks. I could be wrong, but I can't think of a parking lot in the middle of any block that I know of. As far as diverse housing, I think we have quite a bit of diverse housing available to us. As somebody who is aging in place with a disability, I'll find my own place to live. I don't need any of you people to be looking for places for me to live. I appreciate everything you do, but I can look out for myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else present who would like to make public comments? Thank you very much. We can move on to, we're actually going to move on to old business and jump into the master plan subcommittee discussions. So at our last meeting, what the planning commission did is we took the action items in the master plan, divided those up into 3 smaller subcommittees so that the commissioners could take a bit of a deeper dive, take a look at those action items, the objectives and the goals, and just kind of take a little bit of time to review each section a little further with those specific bullet points. So actually, if we want to start with, I was going to start with Commissioners Pataki and Chesterton, since you are sitting next to each other, and I know you guys did a deep dive into the zoning. So if you'd like to just share some of the highlights or some of the comments that you had.
Are we in an open discussion mode here?
I
How do
would
we
say, yeah, I think we can,
just address each other freely?
I think that the goal tonight, Commissioner Chesterton, is for us to hear everyone's kind of closer scrutiny of these subsections of the plans, and then get a chance to dialogue with each other so we can hopefully
So we just kind of report out.
and then if other commissioners have questions or comments, then we can all, the goal is to work together to refine this a little bit more, because obviously no plan is perfect in its first draft. So this way we can work together and make those improvements.
Good. Why don't you go through what we workshop together, and then I think you've got some independent comments next. So we'll do
Great.
what we did together.
Thank you.
Sounds good. So the approach we took is Commissioner Chesterton and I kind of looked at our sections independently, our sections being the neighborhoods and the zoning. And then after we did that, we came together and kind of discussed our individual input. I was pleased that a lot of our comments lined up. We had, there's a lot of overlap between what we found. I think one area that we had a lot of the same commentary had to do with the specificity of the different bullet points within the draft. And by that, I mean that there's certain parts that are quite specific in the draft, and then other cases where it's not as specific as I would have liked personally. So for example, the residential buildings design guidelines, implementing those as standards in the zoning ordinance. That was a high priority. There are parts of those guidelines in the draft that are more specific than our current code, I guess you could call it, and others where they're more specific. So that sort of begs the question of, if we were to implement, how would we go about weaving the two sources together? Would we implement what's in the draft wholesale and replace what we have? Or would someone have to kind of wordsmith it and identify where there's areas where one is more specific than the other and choose what will be the final draft going forward? So there was some commentary about that. There are other parts of it too where the language is, words like well connected or increased distance to parking lots, one of the other bullet points, and those I think would need some definitions, more definition, before we were to actually put a draft out to the public, in my opinion. So that's what Commissioner Chesterton and I kind of talked about. I know she had some other commentary. Also, I think, in my personal view, there's areas of the sections that I reviewed where I had concerns about the prioritization that was in the draft. We have some surveys. We've actually had a couple surveys. One was quite extensive in the spring. And I think the main results of those surveys were that the community is very concerned with infrastructure, city services, also to some extent developing the commercial areas of the city. So in my mind, those should be the highest priority items identified in the draft. I saw a lot of other items, which are good items and would probably be good for our city to do, but when I went through not just my section, but I looked through the rest of the draft as well, I think I counted like 28 high priority items. It's been told to me that if you have too many high priority items, you don't really have any. And as far as I'm concerned, I would prefer that the draft focus on those 3 items that I mentioned that are identified by the community as high priority. And so there's some reprioritization I think would have to be done, some tweaking with that before we finalize the plan. So I guess that's my 2 cents, and then I'll let Amy take it from there. And I guess there's any questions about any of my comments.
Thank you. Yeah. Commissioner Chesterton, sorry.
So Commissioner Pataki and I, as he mentioned, went through, I think he should get full credit for being very organized and very methodical about the process. So that was making things a lot easier. I think the only, and I wrote this City Manager Seidlin to you in an email, and I know it came in under the wire, but I think in terms of the general and most important pieces, number 1 is the incorporation of city-owned property. I think we've heard that several times. I think Mayor Hodges brought that up. I know that we've seen a lot of input that's come. We have people in the audience tonight that have discussed, that have brought this up. An incorporation of city-owned property into the planning process, which would include an inventory of all city-owned land. Ideally created as a dashboard in lieu of a static map. And to conduct yearly planning and check in on the status of that city-owned land, because we know that ownership is some moving target sometimes. But probably most importantly is to create a standardized process for the utilization of that city-owned land, including community vision, design framework, RFP processes. And there's a myriad of great examples about how really high functioning cities put that together. I just put one link in this email, but we could talk about that. So that's a major lift. Like that is something that we don't necessarily need to put into the master plan, but it's something as a goal that we need to put into the master plan. It's not a creation we need to do, but I really think that we've heard it from all cries that that's something that needs to be addressed. So I think that that's probably the highest priority. As Commissioner Pataki mentioned, we did talk a lot about the design guidelines that are written into the master plan. I think it was spectacular that MKSK took a stab at putting it in. I do think that some of the items that are in there, as I mentioned, are oddly specific in some areas and then sort of somewhat silent in others. Probably what's most useful is anything related to form, height, setback, where the parking goes, which was there, but it needs to be a little bit more consistent and maybe remove things like materials. It'd be great, maybe someday if we get to true design guidelines, but I think we need to crawl before we can walk in terms of regulating those types of things. And I don't know if the community even wants that. That can sometimes be problematic. And so, but that is something that is, I believe, to be a really, really high priority because we can't create our new zoning ordinance without that. So that's probably going to be something that should really move up on the to-do list. One item that I brought up that's semi-related to design guidelines is the permitting. I don't know if that's the right word, but permitting or review of the creation of impervious surfaces. With obviously the storm events that we have, the zoning very loosely regulates impervious spaces that can be put into someone's property by way of the parking. But it's completely silent on any other impervious surface. So without overreaching too much, in theory, somebody could pave their entire backyard based on the existing zoning. They couldn't, there's a lot of statements on what can be built from a vertical structure. But if you wanted to pave your entire backyard, and again, we need to talk about this as a group, if that's something that we want to regulate, but that's a significant burden on our storm system. So that's something that we might, and again, a lot of high functioning communities have great examples about how to do that. Then signage, our ordinance needs to be updated. I think we've talked about this several times, but I didn't see it on the to-do list, and I could have missed it if it wasn't in my section. And then lastly, enforcement. Just we can do all this stuff, but if we don't have the capacity to enforce any of it, this was all a really beautiful document that we put together. So those are the highlights. And I've submitted all of my notes in more detail in 3 forms now: the email, the full PDF markup, and then the list that Commissioner Pataki and I put together.
Thank you. The two of you did a fantastic job. The only comment that I would have is I would agree with Commissioner Pataki. I think, obviously, considering all of the storms that we had last summer, that infrastructure is clearly the highest priority for the city right now. I do think we can take infrastructure as the highest priority, but then also have some high priority, check marks within these other subsections too. So I don't think that detracts from it, but obviously I think City Council has made the statement, Mayor Hodges, our looking at this master plan, we need to look at in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, where is our infrastructure going to be? How is that going to be improved? And how are we going to help ensure that we're not going to have any catastrophic events like the one that happened this last summer? So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Do any of the other commissioners have anything they wanted to add or questions?
I have a comment real quick that'll help the commission, and to Commissioner Chesterton's point. We just had a ordinance review meeting earlier this week, and our goal as the ordinance review committee is to identify 2 or 3 discussion points within the zoning and the ordinances. And one of those that you did mention is the sign ordinance. Currently, it's non-compliant, and so we're looking to revise that right now. Actually, you did mention too, we have had several instances where the language is unclear about the parking in front of homes. That we've had several instances where almost, I'm going to call it like a half U shape or front parking in front of homes that we're looking to identify in that zoning ordinance right now. So this document is certainly helping us out to address some of those concerns, and something that we're taking a deeper dive on as the ordinance review committee. So thank you.
Absolutely. And I guess we can probably clarify that too, is the master plan is it's the goalpost, and all of these different checkpoints that we have, we turn this over to city administration and city council, and it's their job to enact all of the different pieces of this plan at the appropriate time. So we are, going to recommend and then pass it along to Mayor Hodges and City Manager Seisland to take it from there. There is one section in here as well that I do just want to point out. And again, hopefully this is something that perhaps ordinance review can take up sooner rather than later. And something that will, Commissioner Coletta and Commissioner Sampier will have a particular interest in talking about updating our zoning for childcare to allow in-home licensed childcare centers. And as we look at, again, taking that as the first step, maybe to allow a limited number of those in-home daycares, because there's such a desperate need in the community for our young families. And then as that moves forward, looking at the commercial zoning and where are the good places in Grosse Pointe Park for a child care center.
Yeah. Okay.
That would be my only additional comment. Anyone else? I can't see. I'm sorry. I'm just. All right. We'll move on to Commissioners Coletta and Santerre. The two of you would like to talk about your section, which was complete streets.
Sure. So Commissioner Semper and I found ourselves in pretty consistent agreement that a lot of the recommendations that were made by MKSK were good ones. And there were some that were more aspirational than others, and they maybe are gonna would need to take a back seat, at least in the near term. And there were a couple of things that we thought deserved higher priority than the priority designated by MKSK. And we sort of went through the action plan items and discussed which ones maybe needed a little bit higher emphasis than others. And one of the things that we thought was most important was to improve the pedestrian crossings in the business districts in their schools, especially with Trombley having closed and more people having to get across major thoroughfares, things like that. Improving everything and making sure that it's safe for everybody is, we think, the highest priority in terms of the complete streets aspect of the plan.
And you know, it said high, but we almost thought it was like extra high.
Extra.
Okay.
Right, like number one,
On this.
yeah.
Extra high.
Extra
Got
high.
it. Okay.
And there was one of the action plan items that we sort of thought was, like, for lack of a more professional way to put it, like, pretty cool, which was the shared use path in the median along Windmill Point. And we both kind of agreed that the way Windmill Point is set up right now, it's used a lot by bikers and families walking dogs and things like that, but it's not really used in a safe way. And with the sidewalk being on only one side of the street, it gets congested and people just use the street instead. And I think if I recall correctly, when I was reviewing the survey results from the city, the plurality anyway of the votes was that this was not a priority, or that people didn't care either way about it. But we both thought that it was something that would get used a lot more than people maybe even consider at first blush. Specifically for families and for people with dogs and things like that, where who knows what happens if they're out walking in the street. Piling on to that too, that it seems that people don't always go 25 miles an hour on Windmill Point because the road is so wide, and there's no stop signs or traffic lights. So it's kind of a chicken and egg thing with that, and all of the pedestrian crossings on Windmill Point that were recommended in the action plan. Without the mixed use path, Commissioner Semper and I didn't see much point in putting a bunch of pedestrian crossings along Windmill Point, simply because there isn't going to be really anything to get to. So, those were our thoughts on objective one, and objective two with the bicycle usage and safety. One of the things that sort of made sense to us is that is this idea of adding additional bike racks. That was characterized as a low priority by MKSK, but it seemed to us that it's a low cost thing that would make a really big impact in people's ability to ride their bikes around town. And so it makes sense to maybe get that out of the way early, and by doing that, encourage people to bike a little bit more.
Right, like, just to add on to that, we have several items, objectives that are all about biking, but we made bike racks the lowest. So we have no place to put that. And we also were thinking through, and this is throughout the master plan, what objectives can we hit right away that are
What's the
easy
low
wins,
need for?
you know, easy to implement, but would have a high impact, and would affect the community positively, you know, as soon as we can adopt this, right? So get, you know, select a couple locations so we can add additional bike racks, come up with some cool designs, work with maybe the local schools or something, for these new areas to put the bikes in, while we're trying to figure out all the other things for biking. Just as an example, and I think that would go through all the different objectives and goals of, we pick maybe one or two in each category that are just immediate hits that would have a great impact on the city.
Absolutely, and we both sort of agreed with all of the recommendations that MKSK made in terms of improving bikeability on some of the city streets, especially along Kirchable and along Charlevoix. It'll be interesting what our working relationship is going to have to be with the county and with the city of Detroit in terms of what to do along Jefferson and Mack Avenue. I have no idea how functionally how that works. But the stuff that the city can control, our city can control on its own, we thought the recommendations were good. And it would encourage people to all use the road in a responsible way. In terms of objective 3, regarding transit, one of the things that, and actually, talking about bikes again, I'm sorry, objective 2, Commissioner Sampier had an interesting idea, and maybe might be worth looking into instead of a bike share program, which is something that we could absolutely explore to gauge interest in it. An easy way to do that perhaps could be something like a bike library, because we already check out tools and artwork, I learned today, to people in the city. And if we had a bike library where perhaps people could check out a bike for the day and use that to ride around town, then that might give us some insight into how much people would use a formal bike share program. And that would be low cost to the city and low impact as well. So that was our final thought on objective 2. In terms of objective 3 with public infrastructure and transit, the bus shelter issue, we both think is a pretty high priority. And there's no sense in having ugly bus shelters. Commissioner Sampier, by way of a quick Google search, I think she maybe has done this before, found a number of really nice looking bus shelters that could fit into the parts of the city where they're constructed. And her example was, if we need a bike shelter, a bus shelter at the Arts Center, have it look like art and it maybe incorporate some more sculptural elements into it. And so we thought that was a pretty high priority. One of the more aspirational sections of the recommendations had to do with future technology with automobiles and things like that. And she and I both agreed that EV charging stations placed around the city would be a really neat thing to do. And the MKSK recommendations even indicate that other cities have been successful in getting grant money and things like that to install the infrastructure for it, which would be a wonderful thing to explore. The rest of their recommendations regarding the future vehicle technology, it seemed a bit too far in the future for us to really seriously try and incorporate in a meaningful way right now. I think when we're talking about cars, fully autonomous cars all talking to each other and having that reduce the need for parking, that seems like it's a ways down the road. So we both thought it was probably appropriate to sort of put that a little bit more on the back burner and focus on things that we can do now first. So those are most of our thoughts. I think I covered most of it, Commissioner Sampier, if you had anything to add.
That's accurate, and we did send them over to Nick, but we weren't able to print it, so I can send you a new version of that. If you want to print that on comments and then share with all the other commissioners.
Thank you. I love the idea of a bike library. I think that's a great, just creative way, like you said, to then gauge the need that if we were to use the MOGO bikes, will they actually be used? And then,
And continue to, build on the culture of biking, so people need, and then provide other options than just a regular bike, right? Double bikes, cargo bikes,
right.
ADA accessible bikes. So there's all sorts of different things that we can play around with on that.
Awesome. I think that's phenomenal that you guys are thinking outside of the box for that. And then, like you talked about, adding those bike racks, that might be something even that like in DDA or TIPA might be able to help with that in those particular areas too. So
Absolutely.
that's fantastic. Does anyone else have questions or want
I guess I have one comment about the bike lanes, which are labeled as high priority along Mack and Kirchable. I don't know for sure, but I suspect based on the survey results that if our final draft had those as high priority, it might be a bit controversial. So what would be helpful to me is if we had some data, I mean, we have a neighboring community that has bike lanes on Jefferson. There's been other communities that have implemented bike lanes. If we could get some data around usage, how many bikes use it, which months of the year use it, that might help kind of sell that idea. If that's the sense of the commission, that we want that in the final draft. Because I know I've received feedback before and I've seen it myself. I mean, people drive down Jefferson and you see bike lanes not in use. And so there's going to be commentary along those lines. If I'm a betting man, I would.
Absolutely.
So I think that should be a priority before we publish a final draft that implements that as a high
Is there
priority.
some data that we can maybe get from
I'm gonna follow up with
East
MKS.
Jefferson and see? if we can do
A
that?
Grosse Pointe Park resident led the effort to do the Jefferson transformation. I'm sure she'd be willing to help. She's
That
with
would
the
be-
Smith Group now, I think, Janet and Tyrion. I'd be happy to link her in. And I know
Thank
she did come to one of the open houses as well, so she's engaged.
That would be great to hear that, I know. So in terms of Jefferson and Mac, because those are both county roads, correct?
Correct.
So putting bike lanes in Grosse Pointe Park on Mac or Jefferson would be a process of us working with the county. So that's not something, like you said, I think would be a short-term high priority because that would take time and design and planning. I certainly know people that have concerns about driving if they drive downtown, seeing people in the bike lanes. My concern with Jefferson, and city manager and I have talked about this, is on Jefferson with the bus turnaround, a bike lane in front of the bus turnaround kind of gives me a little bit of pause there. How safe would that be? And in that particular section. So those are all things that I think we need to reach out to people who have the expertise and the data before we move forward with those.
Commissioner Lindsay, I think it might make some sense for the purpose of the group to possibly recommend that Kirchable be split as a separate, like to lump all of these together. These are
Right.
all
Maybe that can be
massive
separated,
investments and.
right?
And it sounds like we've got very mixed community input on their preference for them. Yeah, I personally believe it's it's a build it and they will come. But I think that if Kirchable were separated out from the level of recommendation, it's something that we could do from a lighter, quicker, cheaper approach in terms of, in terms of the infrastructure investment.
Yeah.
I mean, the reality is you could do it with paint and test it on Kirchable, and we're staying firmly within our jurisdiction. And then start to have a really meaningful engagement rather than I just don't want them.
Right.
I think that could, we could have a real conversation about, are they used and what does it do? Kirchable is a great example because
Yeah.
it's excessively wide.
Yeah.
And I think it could be mutually beneficial from a traffic calming standpoint as well.
And that's probably something too to talk to the city of Grosse Pointe in conjunction as they're doing their Main Street.
Right.
Because if that's something that they're implementing, then if it's something that we can
Yeah.
work on together and have that continuity. So are you, I'm hoping that one of the two of you is looped into the Main Street development in the city of Grosse Pointe, or they're sharing, I'm guessing they're sharing those plans probably with city admin, if there's anything. They're not as far along in their process, I think, is obviously.
Yeah,
we
so
are.
city manager Peter Dame and I, we've had several just light discussions. We haven't dived in deep yet, but it's something that, if there was a potential shared, bike lane that we, both of our communities would be looking to cross the border, cross Cadieux.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
for the purposes of ease, I think we should recommend to just separate them and attach one. Before the other ones I think are definitely very complicated. And I think we could just separate them and attach one and the other, and the other two could be more longer range.
Different priority levels. Virtual. I think virtual is a great one to start with as well, because also considering the schools, the fact between Grosse Pointe City and Grosse Pointe Park, and we've got 3 schools,
Right.
4. If we keep on
That are all
going,
using it.
that could all potentially use it. And especially now with the fifth graders going into Pierce, so we have more children coming from the mayor district at a younger age that are potentially riding bikes, and they all just zoom along the sidewalks right now.
And it also
Yeah.
provides a great opportunity for us to have meaningful engagement about something that people can actually, something very specific
Right.
instead of anecdotally. And the continuing use.
And on the Jefferson front, another resource would be Josh Elling and the Jefferson East Inc. They completed their master planning process as well, and I'm sure, I know it was factored into, so they may have some data and insight.
Great if we can have, actually, is there a way that all of the commissioners, is Mayor Hodges, is that, do you know, do they have that on their website?
Yeah, they've got
So
a
we
really
can all-
active engagement. In fact, even though the plan is complete, they have continuous engagement sessions with the community, and they've got a whole infrastructure in place for considering projects and the like. So and maybe that's even somebody who would come in and do a presentation.
That would be nice.
To give us an
Right.
update.
So
And
that
then make
way-
sure everybody here knows, I mean, you can sign up for the emails and that from the
Mhm.
website, and then you'll know when these sessions are occurring. So it'd be a good way to work collaboratively.
I think that would be great, that maybe, well, there might even be an opportunity, I don't know if there's the opportunity for us to have a meeting with them, almost like a cross
Joint meeting.
Yeah.
collaboration, so that way all parties are informed about what we're doing, where we can work together, and there might be, we might each be independently working on something, and we realize that we could, collaborate.
Well, and we
on
know
it.
that was another weak point in the draft was the neighboring jurisdictions and working collaboratively. So that would be testimony to our commitment to doing that
Yeah.
and making sure that the plan was robustly in line with what they're doing.
I agree. I think, and that might be a nice actionable item for us to put in there to try and have some type of collaborative meeting, so that way we can share what we're each doing and find those common points where we can work together. That will also help both communities, well, working with Detroit and then also working with the city of Grosse Pointe, whether we're looking at county funding, state funding too, when we're working together on those projects, that's gonna, I think, help improve our chances of getting, whether it's grant money to work on bike racks or looking at our zoning, wherever we can work together is gonna help strengthen all of us. That's awesome. Thank you. Okay, the last section is Commissioner Evans and myself. Would you like to start? I feel
Sure.
like I've been very
Sure,
chatty.
Yeah, I'll take kind of a macro approach, if you don't mind, Commissioner Lindsay.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
You can talk about the details. So first of all, I had a great conversation about extremely productive and really enjoyable to have the time to discuss this with Commissioner Lindsay. I look at it and I walk away with a couple thoughts that are, I think, important as we move this forward. I think there's two main things. I think there's the will of the community, and I think there's finite funds. So finding the available funding and identifying potential funding partners to make this an actionable next step. As I look through the plan, I think about all the different components in the community. I think, to Commissioner Pataki's point, a lot of high priorities when you go over it. And then if you have too many of those, you really don't have it. And so really trying to find ways to address wants and needs, right? And I think the needs would be the priority, and making sure that those are in alignment again with the will of the community and available funding. I really look at the business district as one that is really important to creating a inviting community in Grosse Pointe Park. And I think two things can be very true, and I say this often. Grosse Pointe is a wonderful community, beautiful place to live, and there are things that we need to work on, right? And I don't think those two things are isolated as separate topics. So as we look at it and we look at the different pathways, I want to make sure that it is looked through the lens of a variety of residents, different backgrounds. I love the idea of the gateway into with the community center, or the Performing Arts Center, and looking at everything from that to environmental needs within the city of Grosse Pointe Park. We also talked very specifically about the fact of the delineation of responsibilities, so things don't fall all the time into the city manager's lap, and have, making sure that we alleviate some of the responsibilities of the heavy lift for Nick and identifying, for example, the Grosse Pointe Park Business Association, right? Making sure that they have not only a role, but a part of this that is of value and allows the city manager to focus on specific things and other important components of the community to do and play roles in that as well. So, you know, I felt like, you know, just getting involved in this commission now, that it was a very productive look at things. I think that moving this forward, the importance again of making sure that we are focused on the things that are of need and that the funding partners and potential funding partners are all taken into consideration.
I don't know how I can follow up with that, but thank you. So just tagging along with what Commissioner Evans had started to say, some of the actionable items I think that we were coming up with. First, talking about the business districts and really working with and trying to empower the new Grosse Pointe Park Business Association and seeing if they can take on a greater role in some of the events that we have in the city, because I know that you and Chad Craig and Parks and Rec are really deeply involved. And I think that's something that they can maybe, I don't know, I don't want to say they're going to take over everything, but you guys have built this great template of what makes a successful event, and then giving that over to Joe and everybody at GGPBA.
Yeah.
Because they are our micro version of a chamber of commerce. So I think that they've already proven that they're organized, you know, that they are invested in this community, and let's see what, you know, how they would like to move forward. I'd love to see if we could have some conversations maybe with Joe about that. Joe.
Well, I can give a little update, and
Yeah.
there's some good news with that is, you know, I've worked closely with Joe Rebecca, Trenton Chamberlain, and Sonny Mio, and a couple others that, you know, a great example, probably the first where the business association really took it upon themselves. You know, we still provided some support, but they really were the ones that initiated was the Pumpkins in the Park event that happened for Halloween, where the
Yep.
kids came and the businesses, and that this was the first example of working with our business community that they really took a load off of Chad Craig and myself, and I thought the event turned out very well. And we're also looking at, there's potential for the Patties in the Park event. So mark your calendars for sometime in March that they did their first one last year, and that we'll look to probably do another one this time around. And so Chad and his team over at Parks and Recreation, they're a great job at planning, but we certainly are working to leverage with our business communities, and they've expressed that support to us, that even, you know, in the future, being the promoters for the social media and developing those flyers for us, and, you know, printing it to businesses and the news and such. So I feel like we're at a great start, and I absolutely support that.
That's fantastic. I'm just going to move on to, there are a couple things that we talked about here. Would love to see, you know, one of the objectives under business districts was talking about developing a parking study, and we have that parking study. So that's already an actionable item that we can make sure that the city is following and using that data. We also have the expertise of obviously Commissioners Chesterton and Evans, who can help with that list of city-owned properties, and if the city administration wanted to work on how to develop those RFP platforms. We have some built-in experts here that are offered to lend their assistance. Looking quickly at sustainability, the Patterson Park Playscape was not mentioned, and that's something that I think needs to be a high priority item, because we know it's not ADA compliant. So that's something that we should be able to tag as a priority in the next few years in the short term. And obviously marina upgrades, as we've seen again, right, in the last few years, tagging along with what Commissioners Samper and Coletta were talking about, installing some EV charging stations, whether it be once we start to do some meter replacement, if we can do them in the business districts, you know, try out one or two on the streets, and then in the city municipal parking lots. And then moving toward becoming an RRC, a redevelopment ready community, because that's going to help us draw more development and new money into the city. Going back to what we were talking about in terms of infrastructure, everything was pretty much labeled a short range, high priority, with the exception of drying out the sanitary flow. And we did think that that should be a high priority as well, just to focus everything we can on making sure that our water management systems is the number one priority. We can take care of that and get all the expertise that we can looking at that in the short term. We pretty much talked about everything else, so. Yes.
I just have one more, I was gonna save it till the end, just a general note about, data and mapping. I know there were a lot of, they weren't inaccuracies, I guess from MK, it's our GIS is bad, just so you know, we need to continue to get better with updating our dashboard. Things like parks being shown in the wrong location, or parks not being shown as vacant land. I saw a lot of those kind of general
Right.
dotting i's and crossing t's. And then there are some comments about data in general, such as 2010 census instead of 2020. For those of some know, some don't, that the 2020 was just released at the time that the plan was being let, and then there's certain, just like any other census, there's certain drill downs that are requested. They're sometimes not available 2 years out. So in terms of what's polished, still, we really only have 2010 to go on. And so I think that that's, it's an unfortunate with the timing on where we hit this. So I just want to make that general note. When we can, we need to make sure that.
Yeah, and I think we can ask MKSK as that census data becomes available, what can be incorporated, because obviously.
Yeah,
we want to be working with the most accurate and the most up-to-date data when it's made available to us.
right.
Just so everybody knows, we did increase our population by about 50 residents.
There you go. Well done.
So we were at 11,555, and I believe we're just short of 11,600. So. Yeah.
So I just wanted to put that in, and I'm not sure, I know from I'm on the consultant side, that's an incredibly large lift to ask someone to do, to update all of that information. I'm not sure they'd be able to do it at this, or maybe there's an opportunity to do it at an update, but I know we talked about that a lot, like, why are we using 2010 data? That's just a
Right.
general for folks that want to know.
Thank you. Anyone else? So I think what we would like to do is, before taking this plan and voting on it tonight, I'd like to give everyone the opportunity to kind of absorb all of the different comments that we've each made. Take a look at it again, and then if there are any other refinements that you want to make, I think we can take that and come back. I don't think we're at the point where we're ready to say, this is the plan that we want to send to city council. Does that seem to be the consensus, that everyone has some tweaks and some improvements that we'd like to see made?
So Commissioner Lindsay,
Yeah.
how would we, I'm trying to understand the process. In theory, this body would send as far as we are concerned, a fully reviewable document. So would we have to send the most recent draft along with our consolidated list of recommendations? And how would that work?
How would MKSK want to receive our notes is the main question, because we'll need to take some of these, we have some suggestions for moving priorities up and down as fit. So
Let me touch base with Anne Marie Kirby to see if it's, whether we use the priority list like Catherine had, maybe they want it in that form, or they'd like, how Commissioner Pataki has. I'll have to touch base what is the easiest, because as
right,
Commissioner Chesterton said, certainly we want to make this easy on MKSK and not a
right.
pain in the rear. So we'll certainly see.
So we'll find out how our suggestions and notes can be best incorporated and delivered to MKSK. I'm going to say that probably what Catherine and Patrick did is going to be perhaps the easiest, I would think, for them to digest. So we'll follow up on that. So sorry.
Well, no problem. In addition to the subcommittee feedback, what about all the feedback that came in through the survey as well as written feedback that came in from the community? Will that be somehow packaged and sent to them as well, or how does that get processed and incorporated into the process?
So the public comments that I received, I passed those along to Anne Marie Kirby. I did receive several. I can try and dig those back up as well. I believe I only had maybe like 4 or 5 actual emails that actually came through. Most of them were done through the survey at that point, and so I can inquire with her.
And then I assume they make the judgment call on, what goes into the draft for us to consider. I mean, because we're going to get another draft back, I would assume, that reflects all of these changes prior to the public.
That's
hearing.
correct, yes. So we would get a revised version of this draft master plan tonight with the comments that are put in here by each of the subcommittees for final review and potential adoption by this body. And then that would be forwarded on to the city council for final adoption.
And just to be clear to the community too, and people who are watching, I understand the website was down for a while, but it's now reinstated. So,
That
and
has-
individuals were inputting data as recently as today. Does that also get advanced? Or at what point?
So the public comment period ended, I believe it was January 28th. And so any comments moving forward from the public is closed at this point.
Okay. So it will not be considered that.
Correct.
And then, okay, and as we go back and do our final review again, I know the vernacular we often use in my day job is it a nice to have or a need to have? And it's a really simple way of looking at various provisions and making a judgment call on whether it's in or not. So that's just one suggestion I'd give to everybody. And then I really think this is our moment to cause and inspire the best results we want, right? So we have to be really bold about what matters most. And the vision absolutely must include infrastructure. We really have, and I know that's already been noted, but just to, again, use that word bold and ardently pursue that, as well as Trombley, I don't think that figures prominently enough. The borders, and you already mentioned the land inventory and that we already have and how we consider that. So that would certainly, before this could ever get to council, would have to very boldly, very clearly, with a lot of stamina, state those priorities. If it's on the cover, I wouldn't be unhappy. Because I think the community needs to know that that's what priorities, and we need to be held accountable to that. And this document does that.
And I certainly appreciate the comments from the commissioners too of adjusting what is your high priorities and expectations. That certainly helps me looking through here, especially as Mayor Hodges said regarding the infrastructure is my main focus right now, working with city council. I'm going to make one side comment. I'm glad, I believe it's Commissioner Evans or Lindsay, you identified this, but the look at the older tree roots on our underground systems, that is very important. So as right now in the community, we're working with Pipe Tech, who's cleaning our entire city sewer mains through 41 miles of such, which they clean only just minor roots and systems. But as we're discovering more through OHM advisors or city engineer, we're finding that there's areas where there's some tightness from, they're almost branches actually in the system. And that's something that as a new priority, I'm gonna add, I would look to add into this master plan and infrastructure is it's called root treatment. And something that on an annual basis or every other year basis that we would be implementing this so that we can keep those sewers clean.
Absolutely. And again, I didn't mention it specifically, but how can we pull in our city arborists to take a look at doing those assessments of our more mature trees? I know, again, this past summer, there were a lot of issues with DTE being very aggressive in cutting back some trees, but not others. And,
And something too that
How can
actually our city forester and I have discussed, as we look forward in this community is we have a lot of mature trees in Grosse Pointe Park, some that are very beautiful and they certainly are getting to the span where they're actually getting too large for city streets. And that we're finding that some of these trees that, may have been, pretty and worked out 40, 50 years ago, their root systems are actually very intrusive to our city infrastructure.
Right.
And that as we're planning in the future that we need to have, root tree systems that are not infusing into our water mains and our sewer lines and
Yes.
such. So this is something that is a high priority for myself and the city forester.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Chair Lindsay, also as with respect to neighboring jurisdictions and the requirement that they be notified and have an opportunity to provide comment through that January 28th deadline. As I understand it, we did not get any submissions as part of that. City Manager Seisland and I have reached out to Hakeem Berry and Antoine Bryant. They've been very interested in wanting to meet. We did have a meeting scheduled. It was my fault that we had to cancel one because I had a sick family member, but we do expect to get those meetings shortly and hope to have that. One, to ensure that cross collaboration, but then also to secure their input and make sure that this document is really on point as it
Fantastic.
relates to that.
Thank you. That's why
partnership.
I did
So
note that you're the point. You're a football person.
We will
Especially-
continue to
Yes.
pursue that.
Mhm.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, I believe that,
Chair Lindsay,
Oh,
sorry.
I'm
I just
sorry.
have one more.
no, that's okay.
Leave it to me, I always have to, I just want to, when you were discussing things like tree roots, which is really great, but I just want to, just as a message out to this body, that a master plan is intended to be high level vision, guiding principles. It's going to be our guiding star when we decide we went through all this work. It should not be where we find things like procedures for cleaning sewers. It should be where the priorities, where the community has told us they would like us to take care of first things first. So we want to be really careful to stay away from as much specificity as possible. And I'm, to not contradict myself, we've got great things on here such as like EV charging stations, but ultimately it would be best practices in sustainable and renewable energy, these types of things, because we want this document to guide us for the next 10 years, maybe 15 if we do it really well. I mean, the last one took us 50 years, but that wasn't the best way to go about it. So just try to, when we make these recommendations, try to create them more visionary,
The
know that the
larger
policies that come down from them is where the specificity will live. And
Absolutely.
I just want that, just so everybody knows that, folks that don't do this on a day-to-day basis, I just want to put that last little bug in your ear.
Absolutely. Thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to leave the day-to-day to
Okay.
Can I ask one clarifying question? too?
Absolutely.
So what is the mechanism by which it's going to go to council? Are we going to do some iterations, review, and then at our next planning commission meeting vote to send it to council?
Yes,
Or would
so
that,
I'm going to let you explain what we talked about a little earlier in terms of timing.
Yes, so part of the discussion Chair Lindsay and I had today is that, we discussed is, going back on the comments and what we listened to as a group today, reviewing those to see if we can fine tune a little more. And then certainly Mayor Hodges and I will be providing our input as well and getting your feedback back and forth through some of these priorities. The public notice period is 15 days. For advertisement. So we at least want to set out about a month ahead for advertisement of the public hearing for the potential adoption of this draft master plan at the Planning Commission. And then if the Planning Commission approves of said master plan, that would then be forwarded on to City Council for their approval. If the City Council has comments and does not approve of the plan, that they would like some changes, then it would come back to this body for further discussion and then starting that process again. So
that requires a vote by the planning commission to send it to council, so that would have to be at our next meeting.
correct.
Okay.
And that would be, we need to have a second public hearing. So our thoughts, City Manager Seisland and I were discussing that about 1 month from now, we should set the date for that public hearing. So we would come back with a refined list of all of our suggestions and whether MKSK wants that to be either, I don't think they would want it as an addendum or incorporate and make some of those changes within the document to come back by that mid-March date. That would be the goal.
Okay. I would be uncomfortable voting on anything that wasn't a complete document.
Right.
So, if it's like a draft with some proposed suggestions, I would not want to vote on that.
On that, agreed.
Right.
So I think the goal would be then to have if there are any other, like we said, any other refinements that you wanted to make to your comments, we can make those in the next, let's say, 2 weeks. And then we can share them back to City Manager Seisland. So City Manager, Mayor Hodges can take a chance to review all of that. And then that could be sent to MKSK, and it would give them a few weeks to come back with a whole complete document for us to have one more look at, have the public hearing, and then take a vote if we feel that the document is ready to move on to City Council. Does that clarify for
Yep.
everybody? All right, so, and we will come back to setting that hearing date in one of our next agenda items. Is there any other old business that we want to discuss before we move on to our new business of the evening? Which will include talking about setting our next date for the master plan. Okay, if there's no other old business, let's move on to the new business, which is the selection of chair, vice chair, and secretary for the planning commission for this next calendar year. So I'm gonna let City Manager Seisland explain that process. I feel like we've done this a few times.
Done this a few times. We're getting pretty good at it. So as part of every year, this planning commission body will elect its chair, its vice chair, and secretary. Typically, the secretary position is the administrator, which would be myself. And in the future, will actually be the assistant city manager will be assisting this body when that person is hired. And I'll be providing that support as well in that time. And so what I'd like to ask for is that is there a nomination for the chair position?
You want to go ahead?
I think I did last time. Go ahead.
All right, I nominate Commissioner Lindsay as chair.
Is there a second to that vote?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Chair Lindsay, you're the chair again.
All right, thank you, commissioners. I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Is there a nomination now for the position of vice chair?
I would like to nominate Commissioner Chesterton as vice chair.
Second.
Any others? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Vice Chair Chesterton, you're vice chair again.
I move that we nominate City Manager Seisland as secretary.
I second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, good.
There
I'm secretary again.
we go.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Well, and thanks to all of the commissioners and to Mayor Hodges. And these are volunteer positions, and we value everyone's time and your expertise to help lift our city up. Right, the next item on new business is setting the public hearing date for the master plan review. So we are looking at the date in mid-March. What was the date that we?
And so originally to the commission, I provided March 14th as that date. However, Mayor Hodges and I will actually be at the Michigan Municipal League Capital Conference. So we would have to look to actually change that date. So I know there is the school spring break is on.
Public schools have spring break the end of March. So perhaps the week of March 21st, we were looking at. So if the commissioners want to take a look at your calendars to see if there are any conflicts that you have.
I'm not in town the week of the 21st.
Okay. And then what other, I don't have my phone in front of me if you have a calendar.
I'm just making sure we're on this.
Right, make sure that we don't
City
have
calendar.
any other city meetings that we're going to. Yes.
I'm sorry, could, actually, city manager Seidel, could I just get a little clarity on the process? Looking at the enabling legislation, and I believe we're considering the public comment that expired on January 27th is the official comment period that would have needed to expire prior to the hearing. I would need to dig in more, but wouldn't we need, if we are asking for a revised document to be submitted, the public would then need to have a public comment period on this new document?
I will have to inquire with MKSK on that process.
Yeah, I
That's
think,
a,
Because that might then drive the date.
right, and I think that the expiration deadline for public comment under section 41, they need to, as well as the advertisement period. So we can get clarity, and I can dig in a little bit more, but I believe that we need to start over in terms of public comment period, advertisement period, and then the 15-day expiration period before the hearing can be set.
okay, yeah, the communication I got from Anne Marie, I had understood, and maybe I was mistaken, was that it was 15 days, but I'll certainly. look
I
into it.
believe she's absolutely correct, but I
Yeah.
believe it's based on what we consider as the document we would like to issue forward. I don't believe we have
Okay.
that document yet.
Okay,
So at this point then, are we in agreement that we should table the motion to set a date? for
Yeah,
the public
Yeah, let's
apologies.
do-
That's just,
yeah.
I
Yeah,
wanted
we'll
to
do that.
stop that before we.
Does everyone, Catherine and Matt?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like this body needs another meeting, probably on or about that time, to review the new draft.
And
And then
take
from
it
there,
under
we'll know what kind of
consideration.
condition it's in and have a better sense of whether, what the timing of a public hearing might be. So maybe that's what we do tonight, is set our next meeting.
Well, we have, our next meeting is set for April 14th,
Well, and that might work out just fine.
and that
We
might
do
work
one sooner
out,
than that.
and
that
that,
might work
Yeah.
out.
And maybe we'll be able to vote on sending something to council.
Well, it would have to have a public hearing
Yeah, right,
first, right?
right.
So,
Yeah.
and we could use the April 14th meeting as the public hearing.
well, I thought we wanted to meet again, to look at it and get it in
That's
a
not
condition
We can,
before the public.
yes, we can do that too. So then we could have our meeting in April and then have a public meeting after that April meeting date.
Mhm.
Once, we'll let city manager Seislam get clarity on the number of days in that public review comment. Because the initial number of days we had was 60 days.
60 days.
60 days. So if we needed
correct.
60 days moving forward from today, that would,
Well, they're gonna need some time.
we're gonna need to,
document it.
yeah, so.
Take that into consideration.
There we go, okay. If you can connect with MKSK
Connect
and
with Anne Marie.
we will hash out those details sooner rather than later. Thank you, appreciate that. All right, we have come to the next section of our agenda, which is public comment on non-agenda items. So City Manager Seisland, if you have any written comments on non-agenda items.
I have none at this time.
Okay, so if there is any member of the public who would like to make a comment on any non-agenda items tonight, you're welcome to do so. All right, and with that, is there a motion to adjourn the planning commission meeting of February 10th?
So moved.
Okay, and do I have a second? Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Yeah, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, good evening.
Oh, yeah, because for here, for this body.
For this. body.
Yeah.